So we'll go ahead. We're going to proceed with our second class this morning. It'll be on the origins of the Philistines. So if you can, please give your attention to Brother Rich.
Here we go. All right, hello again. You guys, you stay. That's great. All right. We're going to take a look at the origin of the Philistines. Okay, obviously a very important people when it comes to the story of Israel. I would say that, along with the Amalekites, I would say that the Philistines were probably the greatest enemy of Israel. We have a lot of writings about the Philistines. We know one of the great biblical stories, David and Goliath, involved the Philistines. A lot of different conflicts, tremendous amount of conflict with Israel and the Philistines. And we're going to figure out why. Like, well, what's the deal? Why couldn't you get along? Oh, okay. All right, now, you guys are going to be introduced to something called the Lee Cap. My lovely wife, Sister Lee, when I would give classes, she had some feedback, constructive feedback, that my recaps from the following class were too long. It was too long. So I cut it down and I called it a Lee Cap. So let's just recap it. Bronze Age collapse, the backdrop of the book of Judges, the time of upheaval. As we know, the whole coast of Canaan had been wiped out. Egypt was no longer in control of the land of Canaan. Okay, these are kind of, some very important baseline facts that we need to know. Okay, all right. We have something called the Merneptah Stele. Well, what is that? Well, it's a giant piece of stone that has been engraved on it, and this was to record certain types of events, okay? The Merneptah Stele is the first known record outside of the Bible having to do with Israel, okay? So that's a secular source, right? It's not found in the Bible. It's like an extra biblical piece of information. Did Israel exist? Well, we know the Bible says that Israel exists. We also know from archaeology that Israel exists as well because it was written down by the Egyptians. The Egyptians loved writing things down, particularly the pharaohs. The pharaohs loved to embellish. They loved to, show themselves doing just incredible things, superhuman things. And so the Egyptians, particularly the pharaohs, never put anything in there like, oh yeah, we screwed up, I'm a bad leader, I did this, I really made a mistake, I'm kind of a jerk, that type of thing. No. This is all about all the great things that they did, all right? Particularly around war and battle and strength, all that kind of stuff, as we're going to see, okay? So Egypt recorded this on Pharaoh's Merneptah's war against Libya in the invasion of Canaan. So Libya is to the west of Egypt. He invaded Libya. He also invaded up into the north, up into Canaan. So they're expanding their power. All right. He reigned from 1213 to 1203 BCE, right before the time of the great collapse. Okay. So we know he was the son of Ramses of Exodus fame. There's some controversy about who the pharaoh was of the Exodus. Most people say it was Ramses II. Merneptah was his son. So we're talking about the same time period. Israel as a people were in the land of Canaan in the late 1200s, and they were known to the Egyptians. So what does this say? What does this stele say? Or, there's a little paragraph. Okay. The princes are prostrate, saying, peace. Not one is raising his head among the 9 bows. Now that Libya has come to ruin, Hatti is pacified. The Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Giza has been captured. Yoham is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste and his seed is not. Huru has become a widow because of Egypt. Wow! Egypt sounds very powerful. All right, so, and this is very indicative of how the pharaohs and other leaders would write, okay? Look at this guy's incredible. Can't be stopped. Unbelievable. But Israel is laid waste. So the Egyptians recognized that there was a group of people living, after the Exodus, right? They come into the land. There was a group of people living in there. And it sounds like when they made this kind of invasion into Canaan, that they fought some of these Hebrews. Now, it's not recorded to us in the Bible. It's recorded here. Israel is laid waste and his seed is not. Well, that's not true. We know his seed is still around, right? But this is very indicative of the hyperbole, all right? Just exaggerating, right? The exaggeration. Okay, whoa, what happened? Oh, okay. All right. We need to keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that the further we go back into time, the harder and harder it is to see. Okay, less things were written down in the ancient world. Everything was what? Verbalized. Everything was passed on orally, and then eventually it was written down. Fewer records survive. Okay, we're talking about 3,000, 3,500 years ago. All right? I mean, we have libraries that have been destroyed, like the library at Alexandria was destroyed a couple times. Just think about the knowledge of the ancient world that was lost, right? All right, most of our information we get from the Sea Peoples, we got from Egyptian sources. So everything, we have to filter everything through Egyptian sources. There is exaggeration, as we know. There's propaganda, self-serving statements. All right, so we got to kind of filter all those out. So the question is, who were the Sea Peoples? Who were the Philistines? Were the Philistines part of the Sea Peoples? Do we have a situation, brothers and sisters, where we have two new groups of people coming into the land at the same time because of the same environmental collapses that were going on during this time, the civilization? Yes, absolutely. All right. We talked about this already, but most came from the west. Again, the migration is from the west to the east. They were escaping the chaos from their lands because of the famine. We talked about the volcano, all this kind of stuff. They were looking for lands to conquer or lands to settle. Where is land that we can use that is still fertile? Is it near a river? That'd be great. Egypt, okay. They were a mixed group of people from all over the Western Mediterranean. It's like they all kind of got together in their ships. And so there was this massive migration by ship to the east. They were desperate people. This wasn't like the Vikings, right, where you have, like 40 men on a ship or something. They go down the river and they're just kind of, just looking for stuff to grab, slaves, that type of thing. They had their families with them. Okay, so the Sea Peoples, this is a mass migration because they were desperate. They were dying. And so they used the little, the little bit of resources that they had, and they all started to move east towards Egypt, towards Canaan, towards modern-day Syria, and towards Turkey as well. Okay? And so they just weren't like crazy marauders just looking to destroy things and to plunder things. They were actually looking to settle down and to start a new life with their families. All right, one way I like to use an analogy to American history is kind of the Great Depression, number one, but also the Dust Bowl that happened in the 1930s in Oklahoma, in that area. The farmers in that area had over-farmed. There was less rain, and all that topsoil that has all the nutrients, what happened to it? To the wind. Right, blew away. And so it was nearly impossible during this time to farm effectively. And you would have these massive dust storms. Look at that thing, right, that would blow across the plains during this time. And so people are like, we got to get out of here. We can't live here. We can't farm. We're dying, right? They're losing their land. It was bad for their children. Respiratory issues like you wouldn't believe, all right? And so they moved. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, right? Great American novel is all about this, right? Leaving Oklahoma and going to California, right? Tom Joad, right? Was that the main character? Great movie, by the way. Great movie. And so this would be a modern example of an ancient event. where you have environmental factors and other factors playing a part in a mass migration of people. Okay? We can see it today too from North Africa. We have migrants going into up into Europe looking for a better life. The same thing happens as well, in this country. So yes, so this would be a modern example of an ancient environmental collapse. All right, did we already look at this? I don't know. Oh yeah, so this is kind of the migrations of people, particularly up north here. We're looking at the east, but look at all these people coming down into this area. The Libyans, right? So we're talking about an event that is going to affect all kinds of people in the Mediterranean world. And they're going to be moving here, fighting. There's going to be upheaval too. There's evidence of civil unrest, of civil wars, of upheavals, revolts, that type of thing during this time. You have a group of people, everything's fine, for the king and the government, as long as people are getting fed, they feel like they have purpose in their lives. But once the food goes, people turn on their government. And this is what happened during this time as well. We see evidence of government buildings, and also temples being burned during this time. Okay, and we know that the temple and the government in the ancient world, the governmental buildings, center of power and control. So they're going to be burnt in they're going to be destroyed in a couple different cities. All right, biblical references to the Philistines. We're not gonna look these up, but the first is in Deuteronomy. It makes mention that Crete. The Bible tells us that Crete is one of the islands that the Philistines came from. That's interesting, because the Philistines, I believe, were an amalgamation. Oh, big word! Of different groups of people. That were labeled the Philistines once they settled into the land of Canaan. So it's kind of hard, like, where did the Philistines come from exactly? Well, I think there were a group of people that came from far west. There were other groups of people that they may have picked up along the way, as they moved east. And so this kind of mass migration got bigger and bigger and bigger. All right. Mainland Greece as well. They came from mainland Greece and the Greek islands, that type of thing. But also as far away as Sardinia in Sicily, okay, in and around Italy. So, they had to cross a substantial amount of water to get to the land of Canaan. Abraham had dealings with a group of people called the Philistines, as does his son Isaac. And so the Philistines, brothers and sisters, weren't in the land at that time. And so this is one of the things. So why are they calling the Canaanites Philistines at this time? Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, the word Philistine just means foreigner, okay? And so a lot of the biblical writers during this time, instead of Canaan, they would use the Philistines. But remember, the Philistines are going to come into the land, and they're going to just take over the whole thing. And so the writers didn't see any real difference between the Canaanites and the Philistines. It's just the same name. But anyways, the Cherethites and the Pelethites, they were like David's hardcore bodyguard, right? They were some of his best soldiers. They protected him. They were Gentiles. They were not Israelites. They were part of these sea peoples that came, as we're going to see. So think about this. These sea peoples are eventually going to be part of David's mercenaries, right? The foreign mercenaries. And they're coming from all over different parts of the Mediterranean. And boom, they're mentioned in Scripture as one of the great kings of Israel's foreign mercenaries. Protect him, right? Interesting. All right, so Egyptian sources. We get a lot of this stuff from two places, from the ancient Egyptians, right? And also Hittite sources. Here are the list. I'm not going to read all these, but the Weshesh, these groups of people, the Denan, the Peliset. The Peliset. It's an interesting name. The Shekelesh, I like that one. Right? So these were all the groups of people. Now the Egyptians and the Hittites knew about these people. All right? They weren't like alien to them, like they just showed up. They had been trading with this. A lot of times, these guys were used as mercenaries for the Egyptians. Okay, so they already had a relationship with them. But once civilization collapses, these guys are like, hey, we got to find someplace, obviously, that has food. Oh, yeah, we know that Egypt has food pretty consistently, so they're going to end up going there. And so Egypt is going to fight against these groups, but as we already said, they're going to use them as mercenaries as well. So they weren't this group of mysterious people that all of a sudden just showed up into the historical record. They had been around. People knew who they were. Okay? You can see right up here. I'll give you. This is a perfect example of, of pharaohs, like just showing how awesome they are. But on the right-hand side, you can see a picture, a massive battle. You can see they're in ships right there, right? You can see the archers, the Egyptian archers down there on the right-hand side shooting arrows. But look at this big guy shooting arrows. Who's that? Yeah, Pharaoh, I'm bigger than everybody, clearly, right? And so this is just an example of propaganda, right? This is a propaganda piece. Wow, look at the size of Pharaoh. That's incredible. So propaganda right here. Okay, not saying it's wrong. There actually was a battle that happened, but Pharaoh isn't 50 feet tall. All right, so we're not going to read all this, but again, this was an inscription on a temple that Ramses III had dedicated for this great victory that he had over the Sea Peoples. I'll just read, right, they came with fire prepared before them, forward to Egypt. Their main support was Pelised. These lands were united, and they laid their hands upon the land as far as the circle of Egypt. Their hearts were confident, full of their plans. All right, so he's setting the stage for this epic battle. You have this mass migration of people going down into Egypt to get food, right? Maybe settle some land in the delta. There's plenty of land there. That's where the Hebrews they settled, right? In the land of Goshen, which is on the delta, right? That's where they settled. And these people wanted to settle in the delta as well. Their homeland was gone as far as, any semblance of civilization or structure. So they're moving down into Egypt. And we know, by the way, that this was par for the course, because where did Jacob go when there was a famine in the land? Well, went down into Egypt. Luckily, his lost son was the governor of Egypt, so it worked out well. But Israel is not going to be the only nation that would go down to Egypt for food and for safety. This happened a lot, particularly in the land of Canaan. They would, during times of difficulty, they would go down into Egypt. And in fact, during the time of Jeremiah, where did the Israelites, the refugees from the fall of Jerusalem, where they end up going? Egypt. So Israel has this long relationship with Egypt. They have it is really interesting that Egypt did play an important role in the psyche of Israel. It was always the place to go during times of trouble. It's interesting. And it was the very place that God took them out of. They always wanted to go back. I think there's an excitation someplace in that. All right, let's continue on. Those who reach my boundary, their seed is not. Oh, he's killing people again. Their heart and their soul are finished forever and ever. This guy is incredible. As for those who had assembled before them on the sea, the full flame was in their front, before the river mouths, and a wall of metal upon the shore surrounded them. They were dragged, overturned, and laid low upon the beach, slain and made heaps from stern to bow of their galleys, while all their things were cast upon the water. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. So this is an inscription. You can go and you can read it, but this was just kind of, this was the battle that took place. So just think about this. You had people on the shore. The Egyptians were on the shore as this mass of people in ships come, right, to come down into the mouth of the Nile. And the Egyptians were smart. It was at the narrowest place, and so they couldn't really form up their ships and everything. So there was this massive battle that is going to take place on the Nile River with the Egyptians versus the Sea Peoples for control of the Nile Delta. And eventually, Egypt is going to win this battle. It was very close, though. It was very close. Egypt almost lost this. But you can see one of these guys right here, one of the soldiers. Look at the headdress on this guy. Does that seem familiar from any of our like illustrations or anything of a certain group of people? Yeah, that's what? The Romans. Okay, yeah, the Romans later on for sure. But how about this headdress right here? It's what the Philistines traditionally wore. Okay, and they've found actually some of these headdresses in and around Gaza and in other places. So definitely from this inscription right here, we have people that we know wore this type of stuff. Okay, and so there's a connection between the Sea Peoples and the Philistines. The Philistines, the Peliset, as they're mentioned in Egyptian history, they're going to be one of the groups that are going to come. They're going to attack Egypt. They're going to lose, and then we're going to see what's going to happen. All right. Oh, look at Pharaoh's at it again. In his left hand, he's got a couple dudes by the hair. Psh, unstoppable. He's about to take his war hammer down. Crack. Look at this, 3 guys. Come on, you're trying to attack Pharaoh. All right, so this is very typical, right? Typical relief pose of a victorious king, ready to smite defeated enemies whom he is holding by the hair. All right, propaganda. But it's effective, right? Wow. And he did win the battle, okay? So again, with propaganda even today, there's truth in it, right? But propaganda is used for what? It's to prop up a certain idea or a certain person. And here we go. He's propping up Pharaoh. Don't mess with Pharaoh. He can take... In his left hand, he can take 3 guys by the hair. All right? Incredible. All right. Hard-fought battle, as we said. Egypt are nearly lost. Even though they won, they were severely weakened by these attacks by the Sea Peoples. They weren't as strong as they were. Now, they didn't get totally wiped out as like... the Greeks did, like the Mycenaeans and also the Hittites and some Canaanite city-states. They're still around, but they're very weakened. They're in a weakened state. So this is pretty interesting. The first recorded like strike or social unrest that we have recorded is in Egypt. Okay, and I'm trying to remember. I think they were working on a tomb or something like that, a tomb for the king. All of the builders and everything and the artisans, they were all working here. And because of the chaos and the economic downturn, they weren't getting paid. And so they went on strike, and it was written down. You know, it was like the first strike that is recorded for us, and it happened in Egypt. The tomb builders said, enough is enough. We want to get paid. I don't know if they got paid or not. So this is the most important part of this. One thing I want you to remember about this is this. Because of this upheaval, Egypt withdraws from Canaan. All of the Egyptian infrastructure that is in Canaan is left behind. So you're going to have Egyptian villages with Egyptians living there. Just going to leave their villages, leave their forts. And so you're going to have just kind of like isolated places that are all set up, ready to go. Does the Judges talk about something like that? Yeah, it does. It says that God is, you can just go and you're going to just kind of take over some of these villages. And that's what happened. Because the Egyptians weren't there, the Hebrews came, particularly in the hill country, and they just took over all of the infrastructure that was there that the Egyptians just kind of left behind. It's kind of like the way we left Afghanistan. Right? In a way, it was, we just took everything, we took all the people out, right? What did we do with the billions of dollars worth of stuff? It's all yours, guys, right? So I think there's a connection, right, between what happened with the Egyptians withdrawing from Canaan. Here comes the Hebrews. Yeah, we'll take care of it from here, right? Hebrews weren't the only people that were coming into the land of Canaan at this time. Philistines were coming in as well, and other Sea Peoples along the coastline. Okay, so the Peliset, right, which are the Philistines, and other Sea Peoples are going to settle along the coastline of Canaan, and Israel is going to be in the hill country. So you've got this kind of battle kind of shaping up, right? Israel in the hill country, and along the coast, You have all these sea peoples, intermingling, peacefully maybe, but also violently. They're going to conquer some of these areas, and they're going to settle down along the coastline, the southern coastline of what is modern-day Israel today. And so we're kind of setting the stage of this great struggle for survival between the Hebrews in the hill country and the Philistines along the coastline. One of them survives. We know about one of them surviving to modern day. The other one lost to history. And so, brothers and sisters, very easily, Israel could have been lost to history hundreds of times during the time of the judges. Gone! Midianites came in, took them. Think about all of the invasions that happened during this time, during the time of judges. Why do you think there were invasions? Well, there was no structure during this time. There was no power to stop them from doing it. And now, you just have different types of people trying to take the best of Canaan, particularly where the Hebrews were living at that time. Questions, comments from me? Okay. All right, let's take a look at some archaeology. All right. Excavation of a Philistine cemetery. Ooh, all right, in 2016, so relatively new. Many bones that still contain DNA. So they actually got DNA from these Philistine bones. All right, well, where did they come from? Influx of the Aegean and Western Mediterranean people during the time 1200 BC. Boom! All right, so they've used the DNA of these bones to find out roughly, right, when the Philistines came. Oh, 1200 BC, right around this time where the sea peoples are coming in. Okay, so archaeology and the historical record that we have, they match. All right, that's good. The Philistines, as we talked about, most likely, conquered the Canaanite population along the coastline. They took over the cities and towns. That doesn't mean that all the Canaanites were gone, right? It means that these Philistines, these Greeks, and probably Italians are going to come, and they're going to settle along the coastline of Israel. They're going to intermarry with the indigenous population. They're going to keep some of their culture, but also they're going to take on or assimilate a lot of the culture as well of the Canaanites. And so what the archaeological record tells us during this time is you have the Philistines bringing a lot of their own culture, but also taking on a lot of the culture of the Canaanites as well. And we can see this in some of the burial, the cemeteries. And so the sea peoples are going to become the lords, the 5 great lords, right, of Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, Ashdod, and Ekron. And so these are mentioned in the Judges, particularly with Samson that we'll look at tonight. They're going to become the 5 lords of the Philistines. All right, sea peoples. They weren't indigenous to Canaan. They came from someplace else. And they're coming from the west. Israel is coming up from the north. And on the right-hand side here, you can see they're buried in like an oval type of situation, and they're kind of scrunched up with their knees up here, like that. Why they did it that way, I'm not sure. All right. They also did an excavation at Gath. Tel Es-Safai, I believe is how you say it. Gath was the major city in southern Canaan. It was 5 times the size of Jerusalem at that time. Major city. It was located between Jerusalem and Ashkelon. And for a good example, it was the New York City. It was a major metropolitan area, okay? New York City. Chicago, okay? Chicago. And so the excavation gives us incredible insight into their daily lives, right? This is why, why are people digging up bones and stuff like that? Well, we can get a glimpse into what was happening in the past. How did people live their lives? The buildings found at this site mirror other buildings in Greece and Western Europe. Well, that's interesting. So they've actually looked at buildings, particularly on the island of Sardinia and Sicily, and a lot of the buildings that were constructed in that area were also constructed in the same way in Gath, which is interesting. So they took that building technology with them as they moved east. Yeah, okay, so we went through all that. So you can go to these places, which I think is great. You can go and you can go to the Gath. Who was from Gath? We all know this. Goliath, sure, the baddest guy on the planet at the time here. All right, so yeah, pretty interesting. All right, here's some of the ruins right here. This complex right here is a temple complex. Just take your time, just take a look at these two pictures, and tell me what you see. Oh! What's that, Kurt? Two pillars in the middle. How did Samson take down the temple? Look at that. Look at those two pillars, right? So here we have a story in Scripture about Samson going into a temple and what? Putting his hands, either grabbing like this or push. I can't remember. Anyways, well, this is archaeological evidence supporting that actually could happen. Because here are the two main pillars that are holding up this temple. Now, this isn't the place where, Samson knocked down the temple, but you can see that the story in Judges about Samson, archaeology, particularly about the story of his death, supports that, because you had these two pillars right here. It's pretty interesting to me. All right, so what was the economy of the Philistines like? How, day-to-day lives of the Philistines? That's one thing, with Scripture. I think, for me anyways, like I'm frustrated sometimes with like a lot of stories, like in the Kings, right? It just kind of lists some things that they did. It's like, no, I want like a deep dive into this story, right? I want to know all of the information, and sometimes we're not given that. So like in the story of the Judges, God doesn't spend time on like the history, the background information of it, right? About the Bronze Age collapse. He doesn't mention that because that's not really his concern. His concern is about writing down the events of his people, his holy word, so we can take from that exhortations and lessons and apply it to our lives. So anyways, massive olive production. Olive oil, again, was used in cooking, but it was also used for lighting as well. The olive oil production was 30% of Israel's modern production. Think about that. So 3,000 years ago, they were producing mass quantities of oil during this time. All right? Beer and wine production as well. Now, it's interesting that beer wasn't very popular in Canada. They were a wine-drinking kind of society. All right? Beer isn't mentioned in Scripture, I don't think. Maybe strong drink or something like that. But anyways, it was wine. Where beer was drunk, actually, in Europe. Okay, that was like the main beverage. And so, again, this is another example of these people coming from Europe, Western Europe, and bringing their food with them, bringing their culture with them. This is a perfect example. That these Philistines, they still like to drink beer and wine, right? Where the Hebrews were there was no evidence of beer making. Anyways, they were metal workers. They knew how to make, metalwork associated with the temple. They dominated the Hebrews living near them because of this. Do you remember, like during the time of Saul and Jonathan, there were limited amounts of weapons? Remember, I think only Saul and Jonathan and their armor bearers had weapons. So there was a core group of warriors. Everybody else didn't have access to them. In fact, where did they have to go to get their weapons sharpened? They had to go down to the Philistines to get their weapons sharpened during this time. And there is evidence, brothers and sisters, that the metalwork and the sharpening of the metal was closely tied to the cult of temple worship in the Philistine cities. So in other words, it's almost like the Philistines were forcing the Hebrews to come into their temple complex, almost to do homage to their God, right, in order to get their farm implements sharpened. Okay, so it was another kind of psychological way of the Philistines kind of sticking it to the Hebrews, right? Now, there are other parts up in the northern part of where, like but Ephraim, the hill country. The Hebrews up in that area did know how to make metal, but the Hebrews that were living along the border of the Philistines, and particularly Judea, they didn't know how to, for whatever reason. So that's interesting. Some of the Hebrews up north, archaeology says, yeah, they knew how to make weapons. The other ones down by the Philistines forbade them from making weapons. And again, that shows us that the events of Judges in 1st and 2nd Samuel do coincide with the archaeological record. All right? The majority of the Philistines lived a hard existence, just like the majority of any ancient man or woman, like, Joe, Jimmy and Joe, right? This is the type of life that they led. Bones show malnutrition, right? And have the vitamins. Dan, vitamins? The bones show malnutrition. They weren't living, very long lives as well. Most of them are going to die, like dying in childbirth. That was a big thing. Children dying under 5, right? That's gonna knock down your age, right? Anytime there's a lot of child deaths, that's gonna knock down your life expectancy. Did people live to in the 60s and 70s in the ancient world? Yeah, they did. But you had to kind of run the gauntlet in order to make it up to 60 or 70. And when you were that old, you didn't have modern medicine to kind of take care of you, right? I remember Barzillai, right? He was going to sit at David's table because he helped out David, during the rebellion of Absalom. And he's like, look, man, I'm 80 years old. I can't even taste my food. Have this guy, sit at your table. So, yeah, hard existence. The elites obviously had it much better. They had access, obviously, to better medical care, better food, just the less stressful life, okay? And they obviously used the others to kind of, this all happened on the backs of other people. Access to trade and luxury items. They traded with people, better food, less stressful life. I already talked about that. They ate pigs and dogs, okay? I always like putting that there. The kids, they ate pig. Pigs and dogs, baby. Obviously, pigs, you can actually tell, which is interesting, you can actually tell a Hebrew settlement and a Philistine settlement just by the bones that were there, right? What were they eating? Well, the Hebrews, there's no evidence of pigs anywhere. There's plenty of pigs in the Philistines, okay? And again, that shows a difference, right? The Philistines did not have the dietary laws that the Hebrews did. All right, let's do about 5 more minutes here. What was the religion like? Well, the Canaanites were polytheistic. They served a lot of different gods: Dagon, Baal, Ashtoreth. They all had their set of gods as well. The mother goddess, Gaia, was their main deity, and this most likely was taken from the Greeks. The Greeks' mother goddess was Gaia as well, so that's another interesting data point that we can use as to where they came from. The most common artifacts found at Gaza and other sites are figurines of a goddess found throughout the Greek world. Now, this is kind of like on the right-hand side, is the goddess like sitting down or something like that? Who knows? But there's a lot of these different figurines, and here's some more right here. These are all the little figurines that were found in Gaza. But these are found throughout all of the land of Canaan. You can see this guy in the middle here with the hat. That's Baal, and his right hand is up like that. What did he have in his right hand? Anyone know? Spear? Close. Sword? No, something natural. Lightning bolt, right? He was the storm god, Baal, right? He had the lightning. So yeah, these were found. All right. Questions, comments from me? All right, so that was just a real quick overview of the Philistines. All right, we now know what the world of the Judges was like. And for our evening class, we'll take a look at Samson. And then on Sunday morning, we'll take a look at the life of Samuel and Saul. All right. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it.